I smelled the rich, heavy scent of roasted garlic and seared steaks the moment I walked into the private dining room of the Oakwood Grill. It was exactly 7 p.m., the time my son David had texted me for his 10th wedding anniversary dinner. I smoothed the front of my navy blazer, expecting to see smiling faces, raised glasses, and a warm celebration. Instead, I stopped dead in my tracks. The long mahogany table was a graveyard of dirty dishes. 12 empty plates sat amid crumpled linen napkins, half-eaten bread rolls, and mostly drained wine glasses. The party was entirely over. My son David was aggressively wiping his mouth with a napkin, avoiding my gaze. His wife Jessica sat at the head of the table in a shimmering emerald dress, looking entirely too pleased with herself. "Oh, Sylvia, you finally made it," Jessica called out, her voice loud enough to silence the remaining chatter of her relatives. "The invitation said 7. I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the heat rising in my chest. David looked down at his lap. "We, decided to move it up to 5. Didn't Jessica tell you?" Jessica offered a careless shrug, the diamond bracelet on her wrist, catching the chandelier's light. "I guess it slipped my mind. But you're right on time for the most important part." She reached into her designer clutch, pulled out a thick leather folio, and slid it down the polished table. It stopped right in front of me. I opened it. The receipt printed at the bottom was bold and clear, $2,450. Jessica laughed, a sharp grating sound that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. "Since you missed dinner, it only makes sense. You're paying for everything anyway. Consider it your gift to us." Her cousins chuckled. David remained completely silent, staring at the floor. I looked at the bill, then at Jessica's smug, triumphant face. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply picked up the receipt, ripped it straight down the middle, placed the pieces neatly on the table, and turned my back. I walked out of the restaurant without a single word. The drive home was perfectly quiet, but my mind was already shifting gears. The free ride was officially over. My house was dark and silent when I arrived. It was a spacious 2-story colonial that I owned entirely. David and Jessica lived in the fully renovated guest house out back, a sprawling space I had let them use rent-free for the past 5 years, to help them save for a mortgage. Clearly, they had been saving for designer clothes and expensive dinners instead. I walked straight into my study, turned on the brass desk lamp, and booted up my computer. For years, I had maintained a joint household account to help cover their property taxes, utilities, and emergency expenses. I had trusted David. But tonight's $2,450 joke was the final crack in that foundation. I logged into my banking portal. The screen glowed in the dim room, revealing the truth in black and white. Over the last 6 months alone, my emergency contributions had funded a ski trip, Jessica's premium car detailing, and thousands of dollars in high-end grocery deliveries. I didn't waste a second feeling sorry for myself. I clicked on the auto transfer settings. Canceled. I moved to the utility payments for the guest house. Removed. Finally, I navigated to my primary credit card account. Jessica had an authorized user card for groceries and baby supplies. I clicked the deactivate button, confirming the permanent block. I sat back in my leather chair and took a deep breath. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my stomach for years suddenly vanished. I wasn't their ATM anymore. I was simply the property owner. I closed the laptop and went up to bed, sleeping better than I had in a decade. At 8:15 a.m. the next morning, my phone buzzed violently on the nightstand. It was a text from David. "Mom, Jessica is at the spa and her card just declined. Can you call the bank?" It's super embarrassing for her. I smiled, set my phone to Do Not Disturb, and went downstairs to make myself a strong cup of coffee. The real storm was just gathering. By 10 o'clock, the heavy footsteps stomping up my front porch told me exactly who had arrived. I was sitting in the sunroom peacefully repotting a fern when the front door swung open. Because we shared the property, David had a key to the main house. "Mom!" David shouted from the hallway. "Are you here?" Jessica followed right behind him, her face flushed with anger. "Sylvia, what is going on with the accounts?" The receptionist at the spa looked at me like I was a beggar. I carefully pressed the soil around the fern's base, wiped my hands on a towel, and turned to face them. "Good morning to you both. The accounts are closed. I am no longer funding your lifestyle." David blinked, completely caught off guard. "What, Mom? You can't just do that without warning. We have bills. Jessica's car payment is due on Friday." "Then I suggest Jessica finds a way to pay it," I stated calmly. Jessica crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "You're throwing a tantrum over one dinner. We are your family. You're supposed to help us. We practically live together." "We live on the same property," I corrected, stepping out of the sunroom. "A property I own." Which brings me to my next point. Since you are both capable of spending $2,500 on a single dinner, you are clearly capable of paying rent. David looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. "Rent, Mom, be reasonable. Market rate for the guest house is $1,500 a month," I said, ignoring his pleading tone. "You will start paying it on the 1st of next month along with your own water and electric bills. If that doesn't work for you, you have 30 days to find a new place to live." Jessica scoffed, stepping right into my personal space. "You wouldn't dare kick your own son out. You're just bluffing." I looked her dead in the eye, my expression completely blank. "Try me." Jessica grabbed David's arm, whispering something furious into his ear before pulling him out the door. She thought this was a negotiation. She was wrong. The following Tuesday afternoon, the landline rang. I rarely used it anymore, but I picked it up while sorting through my morning mail. "Good afternoon. Is this Sylvia Vance?" a professional voice asked. "Speaking," I answered. "Hello, Mrs. Vance. This is Greg from the Fraud Prevention Department at First National Bank. I'm calling regarding a newly submitted power of attorney form and an electronic wire transfer request for $15,000 from your primary savings account." The air in the kitchen grew perfectly still. "Excuse me," I asked, my voice dropping an octave. "Yes, ma'am. Your son, David Vance, submitted the paperwork this morning at our downtown branch. Because it involves a large transfer to an external account, our system flagged it for verbal verification. Did you authorize this?" The sheer audacity of it washed over me, cold and sharp. They hadn't just tried to guilt me, they had tried to bypass me entirely. Jessica was panicked about the lost income, and David was weak enough to cross a massive line to keep her happy. Greg listened to me very carefully. I said, my tone absolute iron. "I did not authorize any transfer, nor have I ever signed a power of attorney. The document is fraudulent. I want you to reject the transfer, freeze all outgoing transactions, and flag my accounts with a verbal password." "Understood, Mrs. Vance. We will lock it down immediately." "Thank you. I'll be in the branch within the hour to sign whatever affidavits you need." I hung up the phone. A lesser person might have called the police or confronted David in a screaming match. I didn't need to. I held all the cards, and I was about to strip away the very last privilege they had on my property. They had pushed too far, and the consequences were going to be entirely practical. By Wednesday morning, a white van was parked in my driveway. The local locksmith, a nice man named Tom, was busy unscrewing the old brass handles on my front back and garage doors. David and Jessica used my main house like a free storage unit and premium laundry facility. Their guest house had a washer and dryer, but Jessica preferred my industrial set. They also stored their expensive camping gear and seasonal clothes in my basement. "All done, Mrs. Vance," Tom said, handing me a heavy ring of new silver keys. Nobody's getting in without these. I paid him in cash and locked the heavy oak door behind him. At 5:30 p.m., I heard the familiar rattle of David's key in the front door. The lock didn't turn. He jiggled it aggressively. Then he knocked. I opened the door, standing squarely in the frame. David held a basket of dirty laundry. "Mom, is the lock jammed? My key isn't working." "The locks have been changed, David," I said plainly. He stared at me, his jaw dropping slightly. "Why? How am I supposed to do our laundry? Jessica has clothes she needs for an event tomorrow." "You have machines in the guest house. You can use those." "But Jessica says they shrink her sweaters." He whined, the entitlement practically dripping from his voice. "Then she can take them to a dry cleaner," I replied. I reached into my pocket and handed him a crisp, white envelope. "This is a formal month-to-month lease agreement. Since you tried to forge a bank document yesterday, I require a security deposit of $2,000, plus the first month's rent due by Friday. If it is not in my account by 5 p.m., consider this your 30-day notice to vacate." David's face turned completely pale. "The bank called you." "I'm not going to argue with you, David. Friday at 5 p.m. I closed the door in his face and turned the deadbolt. The sharp click echoed beautifully in the quiet hallway. Jessica was going to lose her mind, and I was perfectly ready for it. The next day, I called my daughter Maya. Unlike David, Maya was fiercely independent. She owned a small bakery across town, paid her own bills, and never expected a dime from me. When I told her what happened, she was at my front door in 20 minutes. "I can't believe he tried to forge a bank form," Maya said, pacing my living room. "Mom, you need to get everything of yours out of that guest house before Jessica sells it out of spite." Maya was right. Over the years, Jessica had borrowed several of my things for dinner parties and never returned them. My grandmother's silver tea set a vintage crystal vase and a heavy KitchenAid mixer. "Jessica is at her Pilates class," I noted, glancing out the window. "David is at work." As the property owner, I had a master key to the guest house. I had never used it to invade their privacy, but retrieving my own property was a different matter. Maya and I walked across the lawn and let ourselves in. The place was a disaster of expensive clutter. Designer shoes were tossed in corners and empty luxury skincare boxes littered the counters. I walked straight to the dining cabinet and found my silver tea set shoved behind a stack of cheap wine glasses. "Got the mixer," Maya called from the kitchen, unplugging the heavy red appliance. We efficiently gathered my belongings. I didn't touch a single thing that belonged to them. I simply took back what was mine. We carried the boxes across the yard and locked them safely inside my house. Just as Maya was pulling out of the driveway to head back to work, Jessica's SUV aggressively turned onto the street. She slammed on the brakes, glaring at Maya's car before pulling in. She didn't know yet, but her carefully constructed, fully funded life was already crumbling to dust. It didn't take long for the financial drought to hit them. By the following Monday, the repo truck arrived. I was sipping my morning tea on the porch when the heavy tow truck backed into the driveway. Jessica came running out of the guest house in her bathrobe, screaming at the driver. "You can't take that. We just missed one payment." The driver ignored her, silently hooking up the pristine white SUV. They had been using the money I gave them for bills to fund vacations, letting the actual car payments slide, assuming I would just bail them out when the time came. David rushed out next, looking thoroughly defeated. He didn't even argue with the tow driver. He just watched the car get dragged away. When the truck disappeared down the street, David slowly walked over to my porch. "Mom," he started, his voice cracking. "We have nothing. Jessica maxed out the credit cards. The car is gone. We can't pay the rent on Friday." I looked at him, feeling a brief flash of maternal pity, but I stamped it out. Pity wouldn't help him grow up. Then you know what you have to do, David. You're really going to throw us out over money. I am removing myself as your safety net, I said firmly. You are a husband and a father. It is time you act like one instead of a dependent teenager. Start packing. He looked at me, searching for a hint of the soft, yielding mother he had manipulated for years. But that woman was gone. He slowly nodded, turned around, and walked back to the guest house. That afternoon, I called a local real estate agent. I told her I had a fully renovated guest house that would be available for rent on the first of the month. She assured me she could find a reliable paying tenant in days. The machine was in motion. 2 days before their 30-day notice expired, the atmosphere on the property was tense. Cardboard boxes were stacking up on the guest house porch. They were moving to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment across town. I was outside watering my hydrangeas when an unfamiliar sedan pulled up. Jessica's parents, Brenda and Tom, got out. Brenda marched straight across my lawn, completely ignoring the paved walkway, her face red with indignation. "Sylvia," Brenda barked, "I cannot believe the way you are treating your own family, forcing them out of their home, leaving them with nothing." I turned off the garden hose and placed it neatly on the rack. "Brenda, they were living in my house, rent-free for 5 years. They chose to spend their money on luxuries instead of their own bills. That is not my responsibility. Jessica is a mother. She deserves a comfortable life," Brenda yelled, stepping closer. "You have plenty of money. You are just being spiteful and greedy." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply looked at her with absolute calm. "If you believe she deserves a comfortable life without working for it, you are welcome to fund it. My property is no longer available for her to exploit." Brenda opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Now," I continued, pointing a finger toward the driveway, "you are here to help them pack. Please do so. But if you raise your voice to me on my property again, I will have you removed for trespassing." Tom grabbed Brenda's arm, muttering, "Let it go." "Brenda, let's just get the boxes." I walked back into my house, locked the door, and poured myself a glass of iced water. The guilt trips didn't work anymore. The manipulation fell flat. I was entirely in control of my space, my money, and my peace of mind. Moving day was a chaotic display of disorganized packing and slammed doors. I sat in my sunroom with a book, occasionally glancing out the window. Jessica refused to look at my house. She barked orders at David and her father, carrying nothing heavier than a designer tote bag. By 3 in the afternoon, the moving truck was loaded. David walked heavily across the yard and knocked on my back door. I opened it. He held out the 2 keys to the guest house. He looked exhausted, older than his years, but there was a strange lack of panic in his eyes now. The worst had happened, and he had survived it. "Here are the keys, Mom. We're out." "Thank you, David." I took them. "Did you sweep the floors?" "Yes, it's clean." He hesitated, looking down at his shoes. "I know I messed up, Mom. The bank thing. I was just scared. But I shouldn't have done it." "No, you shouldn't have," I agreed, offering no soft landing. "I hope this new start gives you the perspective you need." He nodded, silently turned, and walked to the truck. Once they drove away, I walked over to the guest house. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled stale, and there were a few scratches on the hardwood, but it was empty. It was quiet. It was mine again. I spent the next 2 days having the place professionally deep cleaned. By the end of the week, the real estate agent had secured a tenant, a quiet, middle-aged traveling nurse who paid a full year's rent in advance. The financial drain was plugged and my accounts were growing again. I finally had room to breathe. 6 months passed. The property was peaceful. The new tenant in the guest house was wonderful, practically invisible, and kept the gardens looking lovely. With the money, I was no longer bleeding out to Jessica's whims. I finally booked the European river cruise I had dreamed about for years. I spent my days planning excursions in France and Germany, completely unbothered by the manufactured crises that used to consume my life. One Tuesday evening, my phone rang. It was David. We hadn't spoken much, just brief texts on holidays. "Hi, Mom," he said. He sounded tired but grounded. "Hello, David. How are things?" "They're okay. Hard, but okay." I picked up a second shift at the warehouse. Jessica actually had to get a part-time job at a boutique. He let out a small, ironic chuckle. "She hates it, but we're paying the rent." "I'm glad to hear you're managing," I said sincerely. "Mom, I wanted to really apologize for everything. The dinner, the money, letting Jessica treat you that way. We took you for granted, and I was too weak to stop it." It was the most honest thing he had said to me in a decade. "I appreciate that, David. I truly do. I love you, but I had to protect myself." "I know. I get it now." We talked for a few more minutes, keeping it light. There was no grand reunion, no instant fixing of the past. But there was a foundation of respect that hadn't existed before. I hung up the phone and walked out to the back porch. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the yard. My home was a fortress of peace, entirely under my control. I smiled, took a deep breath of the evening air, and went inside to finish packing for Europe. I was finally living for myself, and it felt magnificent. Sometimes the hardest part of loving our family is knowing when to say, enough. For a long time, I thought that by constantly opening my wallet, I was helping them build a stable life. In reality, I was just preventing them from growing up. Setting firm boundaries isn't about being cruel or punishing anyone. It's about protecting your own peace and teaching them how to stand on their own 2 feet. We can't buy respect, and we certainly shouldn't have to finance someone's luxury lifestyle just to be treated with basic human decency. It took a $2,450 dinner bill to finally wake me up. But walking away from that table was the best investment I ever made in myself. If you are constantly pouring from an empty cup for people who only value you for what you can give them, remember this: you have every right to close the bank and open a new chapter for yourself. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on more stories about reclaiming your life, setting boundaries, and standing your ground. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.